Hello everyone, it's Greg from Edinburgh Renaissance Fencing Academy here. Before I get to the main topic of today's video, which you can find at this time mark if you want to skip ahead, I'd just like to say a big thank you to all the subscribers out there. Recently, we just surpassed the 500 subscribers mark. This is great, particularly seeing as how I don't do much to proactively promote the channel. The reason for that is partly because I don't have any great ambition to be an influencer on YouTube or anything like that, and partly because I'm not somebody who's hugely comfortable with the idea of interacting too much on social media, shall we say. However, I do really appreciate subscriptions and likes for the video, so thanks for all your interest and support. If you do find any of my videos particularly interesting and you think that other practitioners out there might be curious about the content that I'm presenting, then please do feel free to share the videos. It all helps the channel and the algorithm. So yes, once again, thank you everyone. Now, on to today's topic. Okay, so the main topic for today's video is the defensive principles of thrust fencing in the Italian tradition. So I want to start this section of the video by posing you a question. Which part of a sword like this contains the primary defensive component? What do you think? So many of you will probably immediately think of the forte, so the lower section of the blade here, because it's the strongest section for making parries and binds. Some of you might also be thinking the hilt is the correct answer, because of course it protects the sword hand, the sword arm, and even the head and face, because it can cover you as you advance towards the opponent. So these are good answers, but I want to present to you an alternative theory, which is this: the tip is actually the primary defensive component of a thrust-oriented sword like a rapier or a small sword. If we look at how the guard stances are described in the period treatises, the tip of the sword is always aimed at some specific vulnerable part of the opponent. It's not just generally aimed at the opponent, it's aimed at a specific place. For example, in de Grassi's work, he says the tip of the sword should be aimed at the chest or the face of the opponent. In Capoferro's book, he says something like the tip should be aimed at the center of the torso of the opponent, so somewhere down here. In Bondi di Mazzo's work of the late 17th century, he says the tip should be aimed at the eyes of the adversary. And finally, in Paolo Bertelli's small sword treatise, he says the tip should always be aimed at the face of the opponent. So, in general, the sword should be aimed here or here. The tip should be an active threat, which the opponent needs to worry about and needs to somehow deal with before he can even consider attacking you. This is really important to remember when we fence. Of course, it's imperative that we have good, solid parry and riposte skills in order to have an exchange. But in thrust-oriented fencing, we should always, first and foremost, threaten with the tip. As Capoferro says, the blade and the tip serves to keep the opponent far away. And how does it do this? By threatening him, directly threatening him. So, yes, we can always defend ourselves by parrying and similar techniques, but if our opponent ever does anything rash or foolish, opens up their guard, for example, or forgets to cover themselves before they move in towards us, we should in fact defend ourselves with a quick counter-time thrust. So we should always be aiming at the opponent. As soon as we see an opening, we defend ourselves by attacking. because sometimes an offense is a type of defense, especially in thrust fencing. So really that's just an idea that I wanted to put out there for discussion and thought. I also want to point out that this way of thinking about defending yourself with the tip is kind of a huge difference between cut and thrust fencing and thrust-oriented fencing. So if you look at, for example, Achille Marozzo's work of the early 16th century, it's clearly a cut and thrust system. The tip is not always presented at the opponent. And in fact, many of his guards are so-called open guards, where the sword is held off to the side somewhere, and the tip is not being used to threaten the adversary. So that represents a completely different tactical approach to using a sword in combat. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say today. So if you're studying a rapier system or a small sword system, particularly within the Italian tradition, always keep the tip of the sword aimed at the opponent and make them work to come in and attack you. Make them cover themselves or use some other similar appropriate technique. All right, so we'll finish there for today. Thanks everyone. See you next time. Bye.